Why are you weird?
I'm not weird. I'm not weird.
Don't do that!
Well, don't do what you're doing.
I gotta be me.
Finish.
Really?
Can you think of anything that unites every single person in this room?
God, I'm actually drawing a blank here, to be honest. They're a nice little gang, your mates. A bit different, aren't they?
You march to the beat of your own drum.
We don't stick to the boring and the normal stuff.
You better learn to deal with it, because this is the future.
Altogether Different, the campaign which Channel 4 is running on air and across media to remind everybody, and particularly including the government, if they are watching, that it is indeed altogether different. Welcome to the boardroom of Brentford Football Club, which I have to admit is a rather unusual venue for the launch of a book about broadcasting, although Brentford have been on our television screens quite a lot since we were promoted to the Premier League. I'm a director of Brentford, and in an hour's time we have an event here, a Black History Month event. So the organisers of tonight's book launch kindly agreed that I could base myself here. Now, between now and 7 o'clock, we're going to ask ourselves, what price Channel 4 now? With three of the authors of the new chapters in the book called What Price Channel 4 Now? And they are David Elstein, Patrick Barwise, and Maggie Brown. I should declare an interest, a decidedly non-financial one, as another of the authors of a chapter. And I have a slightly, but only slightly better remunerated declaration of interest, and that I was a non-executive director for Channel 4 for 7.5 years until May of this year. Now, in July, DCMS published a consultation on what they called a potential change of ownership of the Channel 4 Television Corporation, the rather grand official title of Channel 4. The key sentence that most people noticed was that the government's preferred option is to facilitate a change of ownership of Channel 4. Now, that consultation closed on the 14th of September. We now await the government's conclusion. If the decision is to privatise, then presumably that will be in the government's legislative programme. Format tonight is that I will give each of the three speakers 2 minutes to set out their basic views. After each 2 minutes, I will follow up some questions, some are quick fire ones, which I'll put to all of them. But I'll also invite the other panelists to cross-question each other, then give them some time just to discuss arguments themselves. And then at the end, I will feed in the questions which you are invited to submit via the YouTube chat box. First, let's come to David Elstein. David, formerly of Thames Television, which is, I think, where we first met David, but also later you were at Channel 5, you were at Sky. You've also been an independent producer and possibly still are. And perhaps most relevantly for tonight, you are a long-time student of the annual report and accounts of Channel 4. So, David, on the basis of this extraordinary knowledge you have accumulated, please have your 2 minutes.
Thank you, Stewart. I was just rereading a letter I'd sent to Danny Tree in 1999 when he was chairman of Channel 4, and I was challenging about 30 different things in his annual accounts, and he retreated, his old friend, he retreated and handed over to Janet Walker to reply. So yes, my interest in Channel 4's behavior goes back a long way. In fact, it goes all the way back to the invention of Channel 4, because I was one of the minority group, the Channel 4 group, that campaigned long and hard for Channel 4 to be what it was, which was a standalone publisher broadcaster rather than an ITV2. And I should also preface my remarks by commiserating with Brentford after humiliating Chelsea for 20 minutes on Saturday and failing to score. Injustice prevails all over the world, but in West London, it was painful. Now, Channel 4 itself, privatization. I'm not an advocate of privatization. I see it as a way of achieving what I most want, which is a renewal of Channel 4 as a public service broadcaster I'm also doubtful whether it will happen. Once you remove all the ministers from the ministry in charge, the department in charge, it's quite hard to reload and get the new ministers up to speed. So I suspect that it might not make a Queen's speech, and if it doesn't make a Queen's speech, it might just disappear for a few more years till effort number 7 turns up. But in any case, my interest is at how to get Channel 4 to make a larger contribution to public service provision. And now, for me, that requires large-scale internal cost-cutting, significant cost-sharing externally, and that would release a significant additional stream of income. I would estimate at least 75 million a year. That could be spent on content and on upgrading the current content so as to, at last, provide proper provision of education, which there hasn't been for more than a dozen years. Arts content, again, almost invisible, and those locked in as license conditions. To take Channel 4 down from its 70% repeat level to 45%, again, as a license condition. A stronger commitment to current affairs so that all 4 hours a week in the license should be in peak time and should be new, not repeats. Currently, a third of them are repeats and half of them aren't in peak time anyway. The news budget should be ring-fenced. And as far as I know, Channel 4 actually cut the news budget last year. And E4 and Film 4 to become compliant with European content requirements, 50% level. Why the government should own 2 channels devoted primarily to US content, I do not understand. How we get to all of this? One way would be for Channel 4 to volunteer to do it, but I don't see any prospect of that happening. Another way is to privatize, but that's kind of complex, difficult, and even if this government does embark on it, it will face opposition, not just in the Commons, but more significantly in the Lords. And, the process of legislation is cumbersome. So I believe there's a third way of getting there, which is to fill the vacancies on the Channel 4 board. Currently, there are, I think, 3 NED vacancies, and soon the chairmanship will come up. And, perhaps get John Whittingdale to resign as MP for Chelmsford and take up, it's quite a dangerous place to be an MP, Essex at the moment, and take up this position and support him with 3 non-executive directors who subscribe to this agenda of change and either induce the current management to adopt it or replace that management. I think after a couple of years of such proactive leadership by the board, Channel 4 would be in a very different position, would look much healthier, would be making a much bigger contribution to public service broadcasting. And at that point, with the new license conditions in place so that everyone knew what the remit actually was, you could go back to the privatization process if you wanted to, and that would have the marginal added benefits of plugging into a larger organization with better access to capital, to technology and so forth. But I wouldn't say privatization is essential to deliver the main agenda. It would enhance it.
Thank you very much, David. I think based on my own experience as the head of content regulation at OFCOM, I would confirm that the things that you would like to do or would like somebody to do could be done within the existing regime. They would not require new legislation. They would just require a different approach to regulation by the regulator and by the chairman and the board of Channel 4. So the obvious route, as you indicate, is, well, first of all, there is a vacancy for the chairman of OFCOM. There is about to be a vacancy for the chairman of Channel 4. and there are vacancies on the board, including my own position, which has not been filled since my term expired and was extended twice, presumably because they want to keep it open until they're able to put in people who are going to follow a new line. So, I mean, the obvious question is, you are the obvious candidate to be the chairman of Channel 4. Would you apply?
Let me put it this way. I'd be happy to serve as a non-executive director of Channel 4 if the board as a whole was committed to an agenda of change of this type. It would probably help the board to have someone who has run a broadcaster akin to, a publisher broadcaster in the shape of Channel 5, and who has done thousands of hours of public service television. So, yes, I'm willing to serve if nominated. I will not do a Lyndon Johnson.
Okay, I think I'd like to come to Paddy to give a chance to come back on the point, because in a sense, to follow through the logic of your scenario, I've accepted for the purpose of that your criticism.
Stewart?
Now, I'm just, Paddy, I'm just saying that, can you hear me now, Paddy?
I can now, yes.
Yes, I'm just saying this is your opportunity to put a question to David, but I've got in my mind just some context is that I've accepted for the sake of this scenario that David's put forward that his criticisms of Channel 4 are fair, appropriate, and should be accepted. But I wonder if you accept his criticisms of the way the remit has been interpreted.
I think that David and I are not a million miles away from each other. But, and I'll say, I'll cover that when I make my own sort of remarks. But I think he's being somewhat unfair to Channel 4. I don't think he's being totally unfair to Channel 4. I should also say that, unlike you and David, I've never worked at a broadcaster. So the stuff I deal with is, if you like, external, to do with markets and technologies, rather than sort of internal efficiencies and so on. So I think David's sort of overall position that Channel 4 is not either as efficient or as cuddly as it claims. It is objectively the case that it has sort of reduced its delivery of the remit. On the other hand, that I think is because of the pressures, technology and market pressures, which are part of the justification for this whole privatization malarkey. So I'm not really in a position to question what David says about sort of internal efficiencies, because that's not what I do.
Okay. Well, in which case, David, let's come back to you, because I've got some of these quick fire ones I'd like to get through. Now, let's accepting that possibly, as you say, this is not quite the done deal that everyone thinks it is. If it did go through, I mean, what sort of money, what sort of price do you think somebody is willing to pay for Channel 4?
Well, this is something that Ender's Analysis and more recently Claire herself have been interestingly bullish about, which is the virtuous circle of competition, which is that there are a number of bidders potentially out there, ITV, Sky, Viacom, Amazon, whatever. And all of them can calculate what Channel 4 would be worth to the other or others. And therefore there is a discount price. So the big mistake that ITV made when it lost the Premier League was to think, how much advertising revenue can we earn from the Premier League? And they said 13 million a year. The correct question was, what's it worth to Sky? And the answer was a lot more. So here, all those bidders are going to have to think about not only how they could extract value, but how other people might extract value too. So it would not surprise me if the bidding went well above £1 billion and could get as high as 2 billion. And even with the kind of remit that I'm outlining.
Indeed. And of those people you named and indeed the others, who might find the best value in Channel 4?
Sky.
Because?
And that's because Viacom at the moment don't have an airtime sales division, nor does Amazon. ITV clearly do, but the combination of ITV and Channel 4 will probably run into competition issues, forcing them into the kind of arrangements that prevailed when Carlton and Granada merged and which inhibited them for a long time. Whereas Sky has content and ad sales coordination and synergies to develop. And you just have to look at that Saturday night of Raducanu, where Channel 4 bizarrely handed over 4 hours of airtime to Amazon Prime. There was virtually no Channel 4 branding. They had no advertising, but for Amazon, it was fantastic. You know, for them to be able to show the quality of their coverage to 9 million people who otherwise wouldn't have, would have been worth 10 million the other way rather than 1 million going that way. So you can see how an organization like Sky, with much more support than Amazon's likely to have in the next few years, could get a terrific crossover value. And I wouldn't discount Discovery because with the Olympics, we could see how the relationship with the BBC was fractious and unsatisfactory. But if you've got a terrestrial outlet for all kinds of Olympic-style coverage, whilst the main coverage is on your pay channels, again, you can see what the benefit might be.
Thank you, David. Now, let's move on then to Paddy, to your 2 minutes, and let's get another plug for the book. We're talking to the authors, or some of the authors of the new chapters in What Price Channel 4 Now. Patrick Barwise, Emeritus Professor of Management and Marketing at the London Business School. Over to you, Paddy, for 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Stewart. Well, my chapter in the new book is called A Bad Idea Whose Time May Have Come. The arguments against privatising Channel 4 haven't really changed since 2016, which is the proceeds will be limited, certainly small in the wider scheme of things. The claimed benefits are either illusory or, as David has said, potentially achievable under public ownership, and privatisation would come with significant risks to the Indies, to Channel 4's delivery of its public service remit, and the wider UK broadcasting ecology. And that's particularly true if the publisher-broadcaster model is dropped, which seems to be what the government's proposing. The only unexpected development since 2016 is the pandemic, which Channel 4 has handled just fine, although it temporarily had to cut its programme budget. Now, one complication is that the government has made its privatisation case so badly, saying it will enable Channel 4 to compete better against the streamers and free-to-air online platforms by giving it access to capital and making it more agile. And we can discuss these claims and also the government's so-called consultation. David's new chapter is called The Case for Privatisation, and it's what he's basically just laid out. It's actually David's case for privatisation, not the case for privatisation, because it's almost completely different from the government's case. It's also, I have to say, much more sensible than the government's case. So we can talk about either or both. Privatising Channel 4, finally, is opposed both by Channel 4 itself and many Conservatives, but also by groups representing all three stakeholder groups, that is, advertisers, viewers, and the Indies. Having said that, the government has an 80-seat majority, and it may force it through regardless.
Thank you very much indeed, Paddy. So if the process were to go through, as an observer of markets, what is somebody likely to pay for this in a market?
I agree with both Claire and David that this only makes sense to an acquirer if there are savings, but particularly if there are synergies. Therefore, it has to be probably another media company, and probably another media company which is selling airtime in the UK, which allows for synergies, but will also then create problems with the market share of the TV advertising market. I personally am a bit more skeptical than Claire and David, I think that the proceeds would be between 500 million and a billion. Could be wrong. It very much depends on what is done to the remit and also what is done to enforce the remit. Because the value to a buyer partly depends on the extent to which either the remit is weakened or they think they can game it. And so the devil is going to be in the detail of how this is done. Similarly, if the publisher broadcaster requirement is dropped, that clearly makes a difference because of the IP. My hunch is we're talking about less than a billion, but part of the dilemma is that if you want to maximize the proceeds, then you have to weaken the remit or the way you police the remit, and you probably have to drop the publisher broadcaster requirement, thereby risking significant damage to the indies.
Okay, one more question from me, and then I'll perhaps invite Maggie or David to put one to you. As an experienced observer of public service broadcasting, would it matter if Channel 4, with a possibly revised remit, but under private ownership, but probably still counting as a public service broadcaster, was owned by an American organization? For instance, Sky is now owned by Comcast. Obviously, Channel 5 is already owned by an American broadcaster. Does this matter or not nowadays?
Oh, well, that's a big one. I think that's the world which we've been living in for quite a long time. The Americans don't live in that world. So the land of the free the reason why Rupert Murdoch had to become an American was in order to have far less media power than he had in Australia, than he has in the UK. So the Americans are actually much stricter about that. I personally am not in itself that concerned about that, as long as the regulations are tight and as long as the regulations are enforced. So to me, ownership is not actually the big thing. Not everyone would agree with that.
Okay. Maggie, an opportunity for you to put a question to Paddy in with his particular expertise.
Well, Paddy, do you think that the best solution for Channel 4 is to remain as it is without really any change at all? That's the question really I would like to put to you, because I think you are at the very conservative end, if you like, of this debate.
Yes, I mean, I think that, as David has said, privatization is a means to an end. None of the claimed benefits actually require privatization. And the government's claimed benefits are extremely confused about access to capital and making Channel 4 more agile. I mean, the evidence actually goes against those arguments, which is why I say David's case is more sensible. Like David, I think that the most sensible route forward is to leave Channel 4 under public ownership, because as soon as you privatize it, you do actually lose a degree of control. We've got these three places on the board coming up. My fear is that the government's agenda is going to be a political one, and the people they'll want to put in place will be people who are sympathetic to the government's policies, rather than people who will hold Channel 4, the Channel 4 leadership's feet to the fire in the way that David describes. So I'm actually very nervous about what's going to happen with the with these NED, and with the very fact that we're still talking about Paul Dacre as the new chairman of OFCOM after the independent appointments panel has said he's unappointable. Means, I'm not just being paranoid in saying I'm concerned about this, but, if we're talking about the public interest, then to me, the right route will be as David describes it. That is not what I expect to happen.
David, a question for Paddy from you?
Yes, Paddy, I'm just a little puzzled that you seem to have brought into this independent monothon about how they will be negatively affected. I mean, the only independent producers who are likely to be affected by privatization are the American ones, the Warners and so forth. And I see a real upside for the UK in terms of ownership of IP if the genuine qualified independents maintain their 25%. I would urge 35% share, which is actually where they were last year anyway. And an in-house production unit were created, where the IP would be retained inside the UK rather than transferred to Hollywood. So I'm really puzzled that you take this thing seriously, the threat to independence.
I think it's a question of risk. I mean, my basic position is that the UK broadcasting ecosystem is hugely successful. And so I take a sort of rather cautious Burkean viewpoint about messing about with it. I'm much more concerned about the defunding of the BBC, which is the main issue I've been concerned with. But I think that I'm more positive than you are about how well Channel 4 is operating at present. I'm prepared to believe that it could do better, and a tougher board might be able to improve certain things. I also think that without it being privatized, it would be possible to share resources more, with other broadcasts, subject to competition concerns and all of that. But it's not that I'm saying if you privatize Channel 4, very bad things will happen to the smaller indies. It's that bad things may happen to the smaller indies. And since Channel 4 is the sort of lifeblood of the smaller indies, then I'm prepared to sort of agree with PACT that is not a risk worth taking. But that's not a prediction that it would be a disaster. It's a concern that it might be destructive.
Okay. Well, I'd like to return perhaps later to the issue of the indies, because it's obviously such an important one. But Maggie Brown, historian of Channel 4, wrote a history of Channel 4 and has published another book which goes further into the more recent history, Maggie.
I cover 40 years basically now.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, well, on the basis of that 40 years, compress it into 2 minutes of what you think about what's going to happen next.
Well, the reason actually I even started writing the first book, and I began thinking about it in the late 1990s, was that I was aware that a lot of people joining Channel 4, starting out on their commissioning careers, didn't necessarily take much interest in the foundation of Channel 4 and the values that it encompassed at that time, which David has referred to, which I, as a veteran, had experienced. I was there at the time in Charlotte Street. I saw the kind of cubby holes they all worked from, and the kind of muddled way in which they came through in the 80s. And I was concerned that people were not really cherishing, if you like, Channel 4. And I'm, as somebody who read history, I'm very aware that the way to understand an organization or a country or anything is to study the history in order to look forward to the future. So I've just put that there for you. And as I look back at other privatization attempts, what the history tells me is that they haven't succeeded for a number of reasons. And yet at the same time, the privatizations that have been proposed, the threat, for example, in under Thatcher, 2089, it resulted in Channel 4 being handed control of its own advertising. And the second big attempt, which came in 1996, did result in Channel 4's board, and in particular its chairman, realizing that they had to do more public service broadcasting. They had to reform themselves. The most significant attempts that 2015-16 under John Whittingdale has led to the current situation. We didn't have privatization, but we have Channel 4 now in the middle of, you might say, devolution. So I find that the history is really important in the positioning of Channel 4. And what's more, I am now concerned that it's been embroiled, or is being embroiled in this attempt, just at the point when it is actually trying to be a broadcaster that represents the whole of the UK, that has actually sent units of people out, made Leeds its national headquarters. It's been held back by the pandemic. It's about a year or maybe 18 months behind its schedule, but that is what it's embroiled in doing. And it seemed to me, and it still seems to me, very cynical that they've been pounced on by the government in this manner, when they ought to, I think, in all fairness, in a kind of British kind of sense of fairness, they should be being allowed to adapt before they have to get involved in their future. I also think that uh, there is a big constituency which simply likes Channel 4 as it is, which we ignore at our peril, and maybe the government does too. I did notice that the Claire Ender's position has actually shifted, where she thinks Channel 4 would benefit from extra investment. But before we get there, Enders had also come up with a figure that 82% of Conservative voters, when they understood what Channel 4 was about, liked it as it is. I am concerned because I do agree with David, and my books do cover this, that it hasn't happened all at once, but under the Communications Act and the regime since 2003, Channel 4, it is true, had a much lighter touch regulation, but it didn't immediately run away from doing education and doing a lot of the arts programming and other types of music, you name it, cultural programming. It gradually eroded, and it's just there for you to see now. And I think it's a tremendous shame, and I think it ought to be reconstituted in that way. I also think, and David is right here, that there has been a neglect of some of the current affairs, and I was very upset really when I discovered that Unreported World, for example, which I regard since the year 2000 has done a fantastic job in both looking at unreported stories, but also using new talent to make these half hours or 25-minute segments. And that has had a severe cut. It's gone from 20 episodes to 12 a year, and the budget was halved, and it's been taken over by the ITN news suppliers. And to me, these are things which are really quite central to what Channel 4's mission ought to be, whoever owns it. And so I do think that there is a case for, yes, a more stringent approach to Channel 4 of the kind actually David is suggesting. I also think too that when Channel 4 comes to it, once it's, we have to allow it really to reorganize a bit. We have to accept the fact it does a lot of other good things that people don't talk about very much, including Film 4. And I myself believe that there will be, I think, a great demand for it should it actually go on the market. But I'm hoping, and maybe I think with some justice, that this attempt will also end up somewhere else with Channel 4, perhaps with a new type of board, but actually still in the public sector and still British owned. I think that is actually what would suit most people here.
Thank you, Maggie. I just want to pick out one point, which is I'm not hearing many arguments for the status quo. And in the book, Alex Mahon, the chief executive of Channel 4, opening line is, "Let me be clear about one thing from the start. I do not want to save Channel 4." And she basically says that, it needs to move on, it needs to develop. And she thinks it's probably best done, on the current model. But she said, if it's best done with C4 in private hands or under some different ownership, then that is a decision for government and eventually for Parliament. Now,
this is Alex Mann being clever. She is a clever.
Well, that's the point I want to make. I mean, yeah, in your book, your what is obviously most recent elements is about David Abraham's handling, which I think could probably, and I was on the board at the time, be summarized as, why didn't you just leave us alone? This is not Alex Marvin's line, is it?
No, and I mean, this is why it is very good. All my books show that there's never an internal candidate that takes over at Channel 4. There's a new groom who comes in and doesn't do exactly what the previous chief executive has been doing. And this refreshes Channel 4. This is one of its great strengths. Alex Mann has been very smart. She isn't confrontational. She is trying to find a way of, she's not saying, she's saying, I want more than the status quo. I want Channel 4 to really flourish, to be itself, but she is fundamentally saying it should remain in the public sector, most probably. She's not trying to pick a fight with politicians. She's trying to get them alongside. And I think she's entirely correct in that. It's counterproductive to have the kind of confrontations which David Abraham, in a very sort of emotional way, got into. And I think also that a lot will depend on the chairman of Channel 4 and Alex Mann finding herself with a board that she can work with without feeling the need to either threaten resignation. And I mean, this is the whole point. She's Channel 4 has actually got a system which does allow it to have a refreshment and also a reset. And that's what we're also seeing now.
David, would you like to comment on Alex Mann's handling of the issue so far? I mean, I get people ringing me saying, why are Channel 4 doing more? I mean, what would your on the tactics?
Alex is a very smart cookie. The advertising campaign is clever, a bit expensive, but I'm sure she's got budget for it and board support for it. Look, she was the one who worked out the compromise over devolution after David Abraham refused. And, the Channel 4 board was dragged kicking and screaming to agree to Leeds, etc.
It's not quite as simple, and maybe in a future history of Channel 4, I'll have my say on that. But yeah, I look forward to the perception.
And it's got a deal David refused.
He refused to do that deal, yeah.
I'm slightly surprised that Maggie takes seriously the notion that Leeds, and I love Leeds, I'm going up again this week, is going to be the national headquarters. I've never heard of a national headquarters where the CEO, the head of content, and the head of finance don't live there, but sit in an even larger headquarters called Horseferry Road. And one of the great advantages of privatization would be that you could actually close Horseferry Road and make Leeds the genuine national headquarters. But so, Maggie, I respect hugely the amount of work she's done in tracking all of this. But I think that when she puts her finger correctly is in saying that governments can force things to change, but not necessarily in the exact way that they say. If you go back all the way to the 25% independent quota, the Thatcher government threatened ITV and BBC with legislation if they didn't voluntarily adopt a 25% quota. The Peacock Committee has recommended 40%. So you can get things to happen by a combination of stick and carrot, which would be all to the good of the public. I can't see Alex resisting my agenda of much better public service broadcasting. She doesn't probably, believe in public service broadcasting. She believes in changing the world through entertainment. But I'm confident that she's a highly effective manager who could implement a number of different strategies.
Thank you, Dave. Now, what I'd like to do is to offer up an issue which I'd like to invite you, the three of you, to talk about. And that is, we're pretty dismissive, and let's be honest, I am pretty dismissive too, of the government's rationale for why in these particular circumstances. I mean, I think we've all agreed that probably, David, you're putting a better case for it than they are. But the one element they have constantly banged on about is scale. It's about growth. And, I can remember the BBC a few years, not so long ago, running behind the scenes campaign, certainly when I was at Ofcom, saying Channel 4 lacks scale, you don't worry about Channel 4. And I'm sure there's something similar being run by other people now. It is scale an issue. Now, Alex says, she sees a limited value in the future Channel 4 unless it becomes something that is bigger. Who wants to go first on that? Paddy, does Channel 4 have to become bigger or not?
Well, picking up what Alex has said, I mean, I think that the bigger, yes, but sort of organically bigger. So, if we look at these two sort of arguments, one is about access to capital in order to grow, and the other is that somehow Channel 4 would be more agile, which is just sort of just very hard to believe that if Channel 4 were in the private sector, it would be more agile. What we've seen on digital is that Channel 4 is ahead of the two private sector, or actually the three, including STV, private sector commercial broadcasters. The access to capital in order to grow. I mean, again, Alex has said she hasn't asked for the borrowing limit to be raised. And indeed, if it did, then the UK government actually has better and cheaper access to capital than any acquirer. So I think what she's saying is we are driving the digital strategy very fast. We're actually ahead of everybody else on that. So the sort of agile thing is demonstrably nonsense. And as far as capital is concerned, there's a difference between what the sort of consultation says and then what was revealed at the Oxford Media Convention by John Whittingdale, which is the Treasury's refusal to let Channel 4 borrow more because it would very, very marginally increase the reported public sector borrowing requirement. Now, this is just complete madness that, if what they're saying is we're refusing to give Channel 4 the capital which we say it needs for essential profitable investment and growth, and at the same time, while refusing to give it capital, we're saying that the main benefit of privatization will be access to capital to enable it to grow. All right. So if that's what you believe, then you should be encouraging it to invest faster. Okay. Or you can take the alternative route, which is to combine it with someone and then, get the synergies. But it's very divorced from what they're actually saying.
Yeah, it's very interesting, because I can confirm from my time on the Channel 4 board that when there were thoughts about a growth through acquisition, that it was all the pushback from the Treasury was always about public sector borrowing requirement. It was never about the merits of the case.
Exactly.
I mean, David,
we are shareholders, and as shareholders, we should be furious with the Treasury because, if what we're saying is we are turning down investment opportunities which the government itself says are necessary and profitable, and then because of this accounting number, we're refusing to budge, okay? That is economic illiteracy at the Treasury.
David? I don't agree with most of that. I mean, BBC is in the same boat. It's got strict public service borrowing requirement or borrowing limit because of the PSBR. The thing is, it's not contradictory to say that Channel 4 would benefit from better access to more capital. Unfortunately, the benefits wouldn't quantify in terms of UK PLC. It would sit within whatever was Channel 4. So you could never, in economic terms, justify to Rishi Sunak putting another 100, 200, 300 million pounds into Channel 4. You might as well say, why doesn't the government allow Channel 4 to launch 5 more channels and give them 300 million pounds? So I don't have a problem with the government's position. So I don't think the issue of capital is an immediate one, but there is no doubt that Channel 4 is disadvantaged in the current world vis-a-vis BBC, ITV, and to a lesser extent Channel 5, because high-end television, the primarily top quality drama, is getting incredibly expensive. The BBC was reporting a 35% uplift in drama costs last year, and in some areas a doubling of drama budgets. Now, that's not terrible if you own IP. In other words, if you're ITV or BBC, you have big production arms, and they will generate extra revenue from this high-profile content. So it's expensive to make, but you will at least get some value out of it. Channel 4 currently is not in that position. I believe it ought to be, but it's not. And therefore, as a result, there will be a progressive squeezing of budgets within Channel 4 if they want to do as much high-end drama as they used to do, and it's going to cost twice as much, something's going to give, because their revenues are virtually flat for the last decade, and they're not going to increase significantly. Their internal costs keep going up by much more significant amounts. That something's going to have to give at some point. It's not immediate, but it will happen.
Maggie, do you want to come in on some of the points?
Yes, I would like to come in on that. I agree with David that, yes, the drama issue is a big one, except Channel 4 has never really been that driven by drama because it hasn't been able to afford it. In my second book, I was very pleased, on page 10, you'll find it, to record that both David Curry, who was the first chairman of OFCOM, and his deputy, both say that the IP issue, which was settled in 2003 with the decision to basically hand the rights over to the independents, was never meant to be a permanent thing at all. Curry says that he thought it would go after 3 or 4 years. And the other view was that it should have actually been a sunset clause written in so that it didn't continue into perpetuity. I do think that the lack of ownership of or any kind of share in rights has held Channel 4 back as an entity, because it is then totally, really 96%, dependent on advertising revenue. And that is really one of its great problems, its Achilles heel. Channel 4 has tried to be part of this game by doing co-productions, most notably with the J Hunt regime, but none of them seem to work particularly well. So there is a question mark over what you do when people actually, like myself, enjoy very much the kind of Netflix high-end programming that we're being treated to. Scripted is a problem. I do think, though, that Channel 4, as a British-focused broadcaster, has a potentially fine future, because really what we're seeing is this expansion of choice. But because we have streamers and we have great global giants, it doesn't mean that we can't have our domestic broadcasters either. And Channel 4 does have a particular place in a lot of people's hearts and in their viewing as well. And for example, nobody at a regulator told it to do the Paralympics the way that it has done it, in its quite original manner. And that has led to a lot of spin-off programming as well. Where I think Channel 4 is going wrong is that it has been buying up other people's hits, and from the Bake Off onwards, and Changing Rooms makes me despair, really, that it goes into a revival like that. And I also think Taskmaster was just not necessary. I want to see it having the confidence, if you like, to find new hits. And I do think that whatever happens next, and if it manages to evade privatization immediately, which I suspect it will do, I would like to see it go through a form of creative renewal, which isn't just based on thinking that everything has to be streamed and entertainment and appealing to the under 34s or 35s. It needs to actually raise its sights and have a bit of a big creative renewal.
Thank you very much, Maggie. I invited people to send in questions and did points on YouTube chat, and we've got one from Tim Marshall, who's, I think, picking up on the Emma Raducanu point, David, and probably throwing it back in a slightly different way, saying, could an updated listed events obligation, that's sporting listed events, be put to a privatized Channel 4 to ensure that some elite sport is shown on the channel? In other words, make it part of the remit. And for a privatized channel, I presumably Amazon will be well placed to provide such a service, would they, David?
Well, Channel 4 has been in and out of dozens of sports at various times, and it never had any sport obligations. When Adrian Metcalf was head of sport, some very weird things from sumo to... well, anyway, odd things did happen. And its stickability is very limited. So, the story of Test match cricket is an example of that. So the issue of I think much more important is to reinsert education. I mean, it's in the legislation, but it's being ignored by Channel 4 to make it a license condition. And I don't know how you find Channel 4 for failing to fulfill its license obligations, but I see education and arts as higher priorities than sport in terms of something that you can originate, you can control editorially, and you can make happen. Covering third-party sport is a different kind of thing.
Perhaps we've just got a few more minutes. So let's take a couple of other points. There's one question about asking what programs do you currently watch? Perhaps put that as a slightly different way. What would you think might be at risk in a privatized regime? I mean, perhaps Paddy, is Channel 4 News and Gogglebox programs like that, are they at risk or not? Channel 4 News is
Clearly not.
There's we've seen
Clearly not
and their license. Yeah.
Clearly not Gogglebox. And I mean, our Channel 4 News, I think it's more about sort of news budgets. Incidentally, just very briefly, I can't let David get away with the suggestion that the increase in content costs is not a problem for the BBC. The BBC has not had flat funding for the last 10 years. The BBC's real inflation-adjusted funding is down 30% already and is being threatened with further cuts. So the real threat to public service broadcasting as an ecosystem is the funding cuts at the BBC, which sort of sits at the heart of things. And I think that sort of the debates about whether Channel 4 would be better or less well able to deliver on its public service remit if privatized, to me is relatively marginal. And I don't think David hugely disagrees with that.
I want to return to the Indies, and I'd like to do this briefly, because some people have forecast a kind of cycle where the Treasury, in order to push the price up, is trying to push DCMS to put the remit down. In a sense, on Indies, we talked about keeping the Indie quota high, but actually, in terms of getting the maximum value from Channel 4, you could argue that they would want to push the Indie quota down. Maggie, do you have a view on whether there could be such a kind of gaming of the price by reducing the remit rather than increasing it?
Yes, of course there could. And I mean, this is why I'm hoping that my prediction is true, that it won't actually happen. No, I think it's perfectly possible. And I actually also agree with David that if Channel 4 were to go on the market, it's unique. It's a one-off. It's an opportunity. It's a bit like an old master going on some sort of auction block. I think the price will be very high because it does have an established place. And we forget, really, we've become accustomed to the fact that it is what it is. It has the ability to find stars and originate new programming at its best. So, yeah, I think if the government's desperate to sell it, that's what it will do. But I'm just hoping it isn't quite so stupid.
Right. So let's
come back on that.
Quickly, please, Paddy. Yes,
because I mean, the Chancellor is the finance director. He's also a politician. The reason why I'm skeptical about privatization going through is partly because of what David has said, that the two posh boys pushing it are no longer at DCMS. I think PM and his advisors are keen, and Carrie Johnson, is keen. Actually, I think the pushback is quite likely to come from the Treasury, because in political terms, if there is damage, particularly to smaller indies, or a serious risk of damage, the optics of that are very bad politically. And so the rumors I'm hearing are actually that it's the Treasury which is pushing back. So there's a financial argument of saying
pushing back
you
what?
Weaken the indies.
Sorry, pushing back in what specific direction?
Pushing back against privatization going through because of the risk to the indies. Okay, so you're right, there's an economic financial argument which says you weaken the remit, you get rid of the publisher broadcaster thing in order to fatten the calf, given that the amount of money you're talking about is peanuts, of order $1 billion, maybe less, maybe more. Okay. Politically, the stakes are much, much higher than that. And so if there's damage to the indies, that's a very bad, and this is the Chancellor would like to be the next Prime Minister. Okay. So I think that it's pulled in two directions. And from what I've heard, it's the politics which is winning at the Treasury.
Okay. It's yes or no time. So if we were holding this webinar Zoom in a year's time, will Channel 4 have been privatized? Yes or no, David?
Not within 12 months, no. I mean,
No, but will we be well on the way towards it? Let's put it that way, yeah.
Well, I suspect not, but it's going to be driven by not so much the choice of OFCOM chair as of Channel 4 chair. Because if Nadine amazingly gets her act together and says, I want 4 strong people to go into Channel 4 and give it a good kicking, she will be able to say, you see, Boris, I delivered all that you wanted without any parliamentary bother.
Okay. Paddy, your final thought, yes or no? Let's say in 2 years' time, then would Channel 4 have been privatized? Yes or no?
In my view, no.
No. Okay. And Maggie? Okay. Well, that's very, very interesting views, which is not perhaps the perceived conventional wisdom, which is why we've come to 3 people who probably know more about it than the conventional wisdom knows. Thank you so much to the 3 of you. The white smoke is still not really coming out of DCMS. But for regular viewers of My Jericho, there are 2 other events this week. Wednesday at 5:30 on YouTube, Cara Hunter, North Oxford author, on the new Inspector Morse, based in Oxford, Adam Fawley, but rarely in the gown, more in the town. And her 6 books have been translated into 25 languages and sold over 1 million copies. There will be a TV series too. The interview was recorded in St. Barnabas Church last week and is apparently fascinating. So go to myjericho.co.uk to find it. And in St. Barnabas itself, live this Thursday at 5 o'clock, the local MP, Leila Moran, making what I'm told is a rare Jericho appearance. We'll be talking about COVID and much more. And in the present circumstances, you will have to register in advance on Universe by Wednesday evening in order to be able to attend that. I'm told that's easy to do. So thank you again to our guests. Thank you to John Mair and for Philip Barnes for bringing us together. Thank you for watching and good night.
Well done, Stewart. Very good.
Yoo-hoo!